I'll be back. Hope everyone appreciated the Arnold Schwarzenegger image and used to open up this discussion for the belief in the afterlife. The belief in the afterlife, we know that it's one of the Yud Gimel Ikarei Emunah, as we'll see, Judaism belief that death is not the end. There's an afterlife. And I noticed a couple of articles recently that addressed this topic. If you look at source number 1, that was last month, belief in the afterlife is increasing in the United States. All right, very nice. Belief in the afterlife is increasing in the United States. General Social Survey, which is available on the Association of Religious Data Archives website, contains a really straightforward question. Do you believe there is a life after death? And it has an even simpler set of response options, yes or no. I think, we see today very often there's a lot of surveys and surveys and polls that get a little complicated. It's sometimes that they're looking to try and shape the results. Do you believe in life after death? Yes or no? It's been asked with regularity since 1973, so we have nearly 5 decades of data on this one specific question. In that first data collection, 1973, about 76% of folks believe in something beyond this life. By 1990, that figure had crept up to just about 80%, and it continued to rise very slowly from there. Really, from 2000 all the way through 2022, the estimates are all basically the same. Even today, the share of Americans who believe in life after death is 82%. When people ask me, is the U.S. a religious country? This is the stat that I'm going to trot at. Said simply, controlling for these other factors, an educated person was more likely to believe that there was life after death than someone with less education. Pretty counterintuitive, right? So 82% of Americans believe in life after death, and you can go online, graphs about religion, you can go dig deeply into this survey. And the more educated people are, the more likely they are to believe in life after death. And some people would think that's counterintuitive. Sometimes you think those with less education are more likely to have faith, because if you're educated, you're quote unquote too smart to have belief in these types of things. Okay, the afterlife is doing quite well in the general population, but source number 2, 38% of American Jews believe in life after death, study finds. 82% of Americans, 38% of American Jews. Different survey, not the General Social Survey, but this was actually just last week in JTA. Only 38% of American Jews believe in an afterlife, far fewer than in Israel, according to a new study of spiritual practices around the world. That share was lower than the 83% of U.S. Christians who believe in life after death, as well as 58% of Israeli Jews who say there is an afterlife. The finding dovetailed with other results in the survey published Tuesday by the Pew Research Center, which found that Jews were among the least likely in the U.S. to say animals or objects can have spirits, or that features of nature such as mountains or rivers have spiritual energy. Right? Not so sad about that, but we're less inclined to think that inanimate objects are animated by the soul. Okay. About half of American Jews and nearly 2/3 of Israeli Jews said animals can have spirits. A much smaller fraction of Israeli Jews said spirits can be found in objects from our nature, beliefs that are not central to traditional Judaism. Unlike in some Christian denominations where belief in the afterlife is an organizing idea, Judaism has no single doctrine about what happens after death. Still, the idea that ultimately the dead will be resurrected by God is a core aspect of classical rabbinic theology embraced by Orthodox Jews who make up a larger share of Jews in Israel than the United States. So you have, not necessarily surprising when we encounter Jews who believe less than general population, although here, 83 versus 38, it seems, really a very large difference. But the article does mention that it's less of an organizing idea in Judaism. I think this is a larger subject with regards to faith. I've often noted that the percentage of Jews believing in God is usually about 20% lower than the percentage of Americans who believe in God. We're a less faithful people. Maybe we're more skeptical people. We're less focused on the idea of faith in general, right? We have core beliefs and we have principles of faith, most famously the Ani Ma'amin, Rambam's 13 principles, and we're going to look at 2 of them. But there is this idea of that faith is less central to Jewish religion than other faiths. Christianity, certainly Christianity, and even in Islam, in terms of the need to recite faith. I often like to point out that in Jewish law, the only individual who must positively affirm belief in God, who actually ever is obligated to say, "Do you believe in God?" and respond, "Yes," is the non-Jewish conversion candidate. As part of the conversion process, has to affirm a belief in God. The rest of us, it's kind of taken for granted. Sometimes you take something for granted. It's not always going to be as widespread. So there you have belief in an afterlife, and very widespread. In Judaism, only 38%. And he mentions it's not as much of an organizing idea, no single doctrine. It's part of rabbinic theology, and that could be why in Israel there's a higher percentage, because in Israel there are more Jews who accept rabbinic theology, more traditional Jews than there are in the United States. Questions, comments, reactions before we dig down into what is this rabbinic theology, and maybe what happened that is not as widespread. So a lot of this.
I have a question. I just have a question. I'm sorry about the converts. So in part of the conversion process, are they taught about this, or when they're asked that, do they have to give a reason? Do they have to elaborate?
Sure. So the short answer is yes, they talk about Jewish beliefs. In terms of how deep that goes depends on the individual convert, but as part of the process, you're supposed to teach them about Jewish faith. And in terms of how deep the idea of faith goes, no. The question is, do you believe in God? Yes or no suffices to move forward. There is part of the conversion process is accepting the Jewish religion, mitzvot, and beliefs. The only principle of faith, besides belief in God, that is mandated to be specified is reward and punishment, schar v'onesh, and that is part of I guess the end of a whole process as to how much of what faiths are essential to Judaism. Right, Rambam's going to have 13, and we're going to look at 2, but belief in God would seem to be very much an underpinning of all of Judaism, right? A religion, Judaism is a lot of things, but part of it is a faith in a religion that requires God. A unique aspect of Judaism with regard to the faith is that God is involved in the world. It's not just a God who, the watchmaker analogy, made the watch, winded the watch, sold you the watch. Right? God is still actively involved, and that's what reward and punishment represents, and is probably why that specific principle made its way in, but it doesn't really go much deeper. The shorter explanation would be that at some point the conversion process, the questions and answers that are taking place in front of Beit Din, is really a culmination of a process and not everything all at once. Right? So the conversion candidate has already demonstrated a familiarity and an experience with the other parts of Jewish practice before getting to that moment of Beit Din and mikvah. But so it's more straight and to the point.
So is this the same as Emunah and Bitachon? Is this the faith we're talking about?
Yeah. So look, the idea of when someone converts to Judaism, the only thing they have to explicitly affirm is they believe in God, and they are accepting the foundations of Jewish faith, including schar v'onesh, is meant to be articulated. Okay. And as I think in any conversion activity, any conversion ceremony that a Beit Din oversees, you will hear those 2 questions asked, but you wouldn't necessarily go that much further at that moment.
Okay, thank you.
So where does it all come from, this discussion of faith in general and belief in the afterlife in particular? So it's a famous mission in Sanhedrin. The Hebrew is Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek li'olam haba. All Jews have a share in the world to come. As it is stated, your people shall be righteous, they shall inherit the land forever. The branch of my planting, the work of my hands, for my name to be glorified. Right? They'll inherit the land forever. This is talking about Olam Haba. So first off, it seems that we're talking about an afterlife. Right? It's almost assumed that that the afterlife is what we're hoping everyone will get. And these are the people who have no share in the world to come. So everyone does, but there are exceptions. And one of those exceptions, one who says there is no resurrection of the dead from the Torah. So if a person would say that Judaism, the Torah, does not state there is Tchiyat HaMetim, resurrection, that person has no share in the world to come. So here we see in this Mishnah, the idea of Olam Haba, there's an afterlife, and that's almost taken for granted. And one of the exclusions for Olam Haba is one who doesn't believe in the resurrection. Now, as can be imagined, there was a lot of discussion as to what, where, when, how does this work? And source number 4 is from the Gemara there on that Mishnah, Sanhedrin 90b, which is one example of a whole host of situations and questions and proofs and discussions of the rabbis on this subject about resurrection. And heretics asked Rabban Gamliel, from where does it derive that the Holy One, blessed be He, revives the dead? Rabban Gamliel said to them, the matter can be proved from the Torah, from the prophets, and from the writings, but they did not accept the proofs from them. If you go into that section, Sanhedrin 90, you will find all sorts of possible verses. They'll take parts of verses. They'll talk about how Aaron eats truma, but Aaron died outside the land of Israel before they entered the land, and truma is a priestly gift only in the land of Israel. So how could Aaron eat truma? There must be a resurrection. Aaron will be resurrected. They have similar verses from Moshe. There are verses that present this, and there's pushback against some of those verses. And so we're not going to go into all of the verses, and you can see there on your own. Some of them seem to be a stretch. Some of them seem to be, very straightforward. But the heretics pushed back, and Rabban Gamliel gave proofs, and the heretics rejected the proofs. Not so surprising. The heretics aren't really looking for answers, right? What's to the believer, there are no questions. For the heretic, there are no answers, right? So they weren't looking to be proven. They weren't looking for answers. They were looking to argue. But just as an example, on source number 5, this is a verse from Daniel, right? Rabban Gamliel said it's from Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Daniel is in one of those Ketuvim, the book of Daniel. And this is Daniel 12:2. Many of those that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to eternal life, and some to reproaches to everlasting abhorrence. The verse in the Hebrew, the first half is Hakitzu v'rananu shochnei afa. Those who lie in the dust will rise up once again. And so we have these types of verses found in Tanakh, and they form the foundation of there being resurrection. So again, there's Olam Haba that seems to be universally accepted as something we're striving for. And one of those who don't get Olam Haba are those who deny that there's resurrection. Now, when talking about Olam Haba and resurrection, the rabbis noted that this is not clear. We can't describe exactly what's taking place. Brachot 34b. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan said, all the prophets only prophesize with regard to the change in the world order in the end of days, with regard to the days of the Messiah. Right? When you talk about the prophets, Isaiah, when he's talking about the end of days, he's talking about Mashiach. However, with regards to the world to come, which exists on a higher later, it is stated, no eye has seen it, God aside from you. So there's the idea that we talk about Yemos HaMashiach, we are foretelling a messianic era, but they're not describing Olam Haba. Olam Haba, no one has seen, no one knows what it's about. It remains a mystery. And so there's this Olam Haba, but we don't know what goes on there. At the same time, you have attempts to understand what goes on there. So Brachot 17a, source number 7. Rabbis want to say the world to come is not like this world. In the world to come, there's no eating, no drinking, no procreation, no business negotiations, no jealousy, no hatred, no competition. Rather, the righteous sit with their crowns upon their heads and enjoy the splendor of the divine presence, as it is said, and they behold God and they ate and drank. All right, the idea of the celebrating by viewing God. What about the fact there's no eating and drinking? It's not physical sustenance and drinking, it's spiritual. So it is clear that the rabbinic tradition is unclear about what this is going to look like. Olam Haba, no idea, some idea, spiritual, eating, drinking, not eating, drinking. It's the rabbinic tradition is not absolute. And this is what led the various Jewish philosophers to try and understand what must a Jew believe. So for our purposes, Rambam And the Rambam lays out his 13 principles of faith, Yan Imam, in his commentary to Sanhedrin 10. The 11th principle is that God may be blessed, gives reward to the one who does the commandments of the Torah and punishes the one who transgresses his prohibitions, and that the great reward is the world to come, and that the strong punishment is being cut off. And we have already said about this matter that which will suffice. I don't want to go into details now, talk about it elsewhere. Olam haba, right? And it's connected to the idea of schar v'onesh, of reward and punishment. That's the 11th principle. When we believe in God's involvement in this world, in reward and punishment, that idea of belief recognizes that we are believing in Olam Haba. 13th principle, revival of the dead. We have already elucidated with the Rambam, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what the Rambam says about resurrection. So you have the Rambam saying there's Olam Haba because that's the reward. That's part of our belief in God, is belief in Olam Haba. And we also believe in a resurrection that will take place at the end of days. So we have to believe in Olam Haba. We have to believe in a world, in a resurrection. So what are these? Can we fill it in other than saying we believe in Olam Haba and we believe in resurrection? So Rabbi Asaf Bednarsh is a Rebbe Yeshiva University in Israel, and he has a great series on the Har Etzion virtual Beit Midrash, where he talks about different topics in Hashkafa and Jewish thought. And so in two of those topics are Olam Haba and Tchiyat HaMeitim, resurrection. Let's talk about Olam Haba, source number 9. Jewish philosophers, however, debate the nature of this spiritual reward which will come to the person after he dies. As Rav Yosef Albo summarizes, the various Jewish thinkers and philosophers have split into 2 camps. Olam Haba, 2 camps. One, identified with Rambam and many other great sages, like Rav Albo himself endorses, admits there may be some physical rewards for the righteous in this world. However, the main reward that a righteous person may expect is purely spiritual. It can be experienced only by the soul and not the body. This occurs in the world to come, which is the place where the souls of the righteous go after they die. Right? Similar to Brachot 17a. What's Olam Haba? Olam Haba is the reward for the righteous. The reward for the righteous is spiritual. The second group of Jewish thinkers holds that although some righteous people do receive a physical reward in this world, most do not. The righteous therefore deserve physical reward in the next world. In Olam Haba, they will receive both physical and spiritual reward. This will happen at the time when the soul and body are resurrected in Tchiyat HaMeitim. So you have one view that Olam Haba is spiritual. That's the Rambam. You have another group which is the Olam Haba is the reward in the next world, but it's not only a spiritual reward, it's the rewards of the physical, which is then merged with Tchiyat HaMeitim. You have a view that is Olam Haba, spiritual world to come. You have a second view, which is Olam Haba, Tchiyat HaMeitim, kind of merged together. As we see, the Rambam and Ramban argue about what the word Haba means in the phrase Olam Haba, right? When is it coming? When is it to come? According to Rambam, the world to come, subjectively for each person when they die. Each of us will have an Olam Haba after we pass from the physical plane. For the Ramban and most Jewish philosophers, Olam Haba will come at a specific later time in history, when God resurrects the dead, introduces a new world in the place of the existing one. So is Olam Haba just this idea that we believe that the soul continues after we die? Or are we talking about a world that is to come at some future point in history after the Messianic era, resurrection, and the like? Both sound pretty good, but we see that it's a complicated concept. I think back to the article that talked about how 38% of Jews, only 38% of Jews believe in an afterlife. Right? If we have to make it so complicated, it's going to make it harder for Jews to just say, "I believe." I believe in what? Right? It brings to mind that the joke about Hashem teaching Moshe the Torah, where he says, "Thou shalt not cook a kid in its mother's milk." So Moshe says, "I can't eat them together," and God says, "You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk." And Moshe says, "I can't use the same pots," and God says, "You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk." And Moshe says, "So I have to wait 6 hours between meat and dairy?" And God says, "You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk." And Moshe says, "And what about chicken?" And God says to Moshe, "Just do whatever you want." Right? It becomes, we have a complicated religion of both action and belief. And so therefore, when it comes to Olam Haba, on some level, we're arguing over the word Haba. is there life after death, that the soul continues forward, and on some level, each person, based on their life, will have an afterlife? Or is it going to be, at some point in history, we're going to see something, and it's going to look a certain way, etc.? And this debate carries over into resurrection. So what is the resurrection? Right? People have, like, especially these days, zombies are very popular. So, what is it going to look like? And right then they talk about that's why people want to be buried in Israel. So they'll be resurrected in Israel, because there's a tradition, if you're buried outside of Israel, you won't be resurrected. You'll have to travel through these underground catacombs through the other side of the world, and only then will you be resurrected. Right? It's there too. We have dispute, because it's not mentioned specifically what it will look like. So Rabbi Bednar Shir, again, summarizes it very well, and this is just a piece of it. The Ramban, Nachmanides, and others believe that resurrection is identical with Olam Haba, and the ultimate reward is to be resurrected in your body and live eternally in a perfected physical world. Right? Olam Haba happens after Tchiyat HaMetim. It's kind of merged, as we saw in source number 9. The second approach is the exceedingly rationalist interpretation of the Rambam, which understands resurrection as a metaphor for the life of the soul in Olam Haba. Right, so there are those who understand when the Rambam does not believe in a physical resurrection, because if the Rambam says Olam Haba is the ultimate reward, then why are you going to be resurrected again? So they understand the Rambam as saying Olam Haba and Tchiyat HaMetim are coming together, all spiritual. So Ramban Nachmanides says resurrection is an actual physical resurrection. The rationalist Rambam understanding is it's completely spiritual. Now, there's a problem with that. The problem with that is that we have a very strong rabbinic tradition that there's a real resurrection. In fact, it says if you deny the resurrection, then you don't get a share in Olam Haba. So how do you deal with that? So the third approach is the Rambam himself. The Rambam doesn't develop the idea very much in the sources that we've seen, but he does have what's called an Igeret, a letter about resurrection. So the third approach is the Rambam himself, who understands resurrection as something different from the ultimate reward of the righteous. The ultimate reward is not to be resurrected, but rather to live eternally as a disembodied soul. Resurrection is merely a temporary phenomenon. Those who come back to life will live in the physical world for a limited amount of time and then die and reclaim their ultimate reward in Olam Haba. So you have an approach of the Rambam that, there is a resurrection, but it's kind of like a small chapter of Olam Haba. So again, you have a real Tchiyat HaMetim at the end of days. That's a perfect world, the physical and spiritual all in one. We have a rationalist Rambam interpretation that it is no physical resurrection, which is difficult. And then you have the Rambam that has, essentially, we're looking for spiritual perfection, but there will be a small period of actual resurrection. So we see within the approach of the Rambam, we've developed two approaches to the significance of temporary resurrection. Either it is significant because it brings some advantage to those who are resurrected or witness to resurrection, right? Some people will see that and that'll be important. Or belief in resurrection is significant because it represents the belief in miracles and divine omnipotence. Right? Because for the Rambam, either way, even for the approach of the Rambam, that there is a physical resurrection, the Rambam doesn't see that as the ultimate. The Rambam doesn't see this necessarily as applying to everybody. The Rambam has a much more rationalist approach to these matters and seems to begrudgingly say you have to believe in a resurrection because that resurrection will show God's great power and might. It will be relevant to those who are resurrected, or it represents the belief in the miracles and divine omnipotence. And so he is really relegating resurrection to a less significant role for everybody. In a practical sense, it has an important educational or spiritual or religious role when it comes to that. And this is why thinkers like Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik embrace the Rambam's focus on this world. Source number 11, the halacha is not all concerned with the transcendent world. The world to come is a tranquil, quiet world that is wholly good, wholly everlasting, and wholly eternal, wherein a man will receive the reward for the commandments which he performed in this world. However, the receiving of reward is not a religious act. Therefore, halachic man prefers the real world to a transcendent existence, because here in this world, man is given the opportunity to create, act, accomplish, while there in the world to come, he is powerless to change anything at all. And that's very much channeling the Rambam's, we want to live in this world. because that spiritual world is not, is the world of the soul, but it's not the world where halacha and Judaism can be found. Now, it's interesting. I saw yesterday there was an article in the Tradition Journal a couple of years ago that in Yeshiva University, Rabbi Soloveitchik taught a class on principles of Jewish philosophy. He taught this in the Bernard Revel Graduate School, and they had the notes of Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb from that class, and someone printed them and tried to provide a little bit of analysis and commentary of Rav Soloveitchik on these issues, in particular Tchias HaMesim. And obviously, the Rav's statement halachic man, focuses on a very this-worldly orientation, which fits in with the Rambam. But also this idea that Rabbi Bednarsh mentions at the end about the idea of a resurrection, because it represents belief in miracles and divine omnipotence. The idea of believing in resurrection is believing in the possibilities, believing in that anything is possible, believing that death is not an ending for everything. And in particular, how that reflects Jewish belief. We know, of course, that the second blessing of the Shemona Esrei is Mechaya HaMesim. Every single day, 3 times a day, we talk about resurrection, which is unique and complicated, considering, especially if you have the Maimonidean Soloveitchik approach of this world. And in particular, to build upon what Rabbi Ben said at the end, there was an article recently by Rabbi Yitz Greenberg. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who was rabbi at the Riverdale Jewish Center, and then it was a professor at Yeshiva University, and then he founded Klal, and had some well-known and some controversial views on faith, in particular after the Holocaust. He's kind of now, I think he recently turned 90, and he's kind of revisiting some of his ideas, and he recently came out with a new book. And in source number 12, you have a little passage from an article that comes from the book where he talks about resurrection. And he talks about it from a little bit of a different perspective, but it is interesting because there he wrote, modern Judaism gave up on resurrection of the dead almost completely. The Orthodox mostly neutralized Judaism's response to bodily resurrection by turning into the words that were routinely uttered but never discussed or internalized. Right? The Rambam, is hesitant about it. It's harder for Jews to believe in it, Orthodox Jews more so, but I think what Rabbi Greenberg is describing here, it's hard to understand what resurrection is all about from a realistic, practical perspective. What are we looking for, especially if you have the Maimonidean view? He then goes on to say that the liberal denominations neutered it entirely, rendering the second blessing of Shemona Esrei as one that blesses the God who gives life to all, or who gives eternal life, right? It doesn't talk about resurrection, it's about giving life. The Reformed version aligns resurrection, affirming God who creates life, but not one who restores it, while the conservative version replaces the audacious promise of bodily resurrection with a vague and presumably disembodied afterlife. Our rabbis did believe in the world to come, but the idea was distinct from the promise of the messianic resurrection of the dead. In fact, in the well-known Mishnah, I think the rabbis implied that Tchias HaMesim was more important than Olam Haba. They may have found it more of a believable too, right? He talks about everyone accepted Olam Haba, and the rabbis saw it as a violation of not getting Olam Haba if you denied the resurrection, but it's become much harder. And the sentences towards the end of the article, I think, resonated with what we saw in source number 10. There's nothing more holy than life. There's no superior realm to live in. Rather, we finite humans should do our best to live, to love, to spend our lives repairing the world for ourselves and others and those yet to come. The God of Israel so honors this truth that in the course of the final perfection, the actual human beings we loved and all their complexity will be restored to us through their bodily resurrection. The idea of a belief in a Tchias HaMetim, a real physical bodily resurrection, the way that Greenberg is describing it is the reward or is repaying our confidence, our belief in living the way that God wants us to live. If we do what we're supposed to do and infuse our lives with meaning and holiness and obedience to God's commandments and the like, we hold out the hope that physical life is not the end. And not only is physical life not the end, the resurrection and the restoration of everything that we've tried to accomplish is ultimately at the end. It's kind of going a little bit beyond the more circumscribed Rambam view that we saw again, more in line with what Ramban and others felt, that there will be this physical resurrection, but it's become harder to believe in that. And Greenberg is saying it's easier to believe or accept or desire an actual Tchias HaMesim when we live the lives the way we're supposed to live. And if we live those full lives the way we're supposed to live in accordance with what God wants of us and how we create a world around us of things that we appreciate and love, then the belief in that ultimately being restored to us after the physical life is something that can give us hope. And he has his own specific examples of where his faith was challenged, whether it be from the Holocaust or his son being killed in a bicycle accident. But the idea being that belief in a physical resurrection is what allows us to infuse our lives with more meaning. And I think that Jonathan Sacks said something similar, especially in relation to the Holocaust, source number 13. Whether we speak of the individual birth of Jewish children or the collective rebirth of Israel as a nation, the strongest metaphor to emerge in the wake of the Holocaust is that of resurrection. Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman's dying words have not ceased to reverberate that the fire which burns our bodies will be the fire that restores the Jewish people. Another rabbi, Yisachar Shlomo Tachtel, shortly before his murder in Auschwitz in 1944, wrote in a similar vein, now if we shall arise and ascend to Zion, we can yet bring about a tikkun, a mending of the souls of the people of Israel who were murdered as martyrs, since it is on their account that we are being simulated to return to our ancestral inheritance. Thus we bring about their rebirth. The idea that resurrection certainly resonates in reaction to the destruction and the tragedies that Jewish people have faced, that we continue. And again, I think it all comes back that this idea of that we believe in a resurrection, it's significant because it represents the belief that God can do anything. It complements our belief in God. And whether it's the rebirth after the Holocaust, like Sacks says, or whether, as Greenberg says, that it infused our lives with greater meaning and purpose, because we know that the end of the physical is not the end, because there will be a restoration of all that we've enjoyed in this world. In natural resurrection, there's something to be said. And I'd like to conclude with one of my favorite rabbis and commentators, Rabbi Eli Weinstock, in an article last year where I talked a little bit about resurrection in the context of a law that's mentioned by Rabbi Moshe Isserles. The Rabbi Moshe Isserles, known as the Ramah, the source for much of Ashkenazi practice, teaches a little-known piece of Shiva visit etiquette. One is not allowed to tell the mourner, what can you do? You couldn't have changed anything. So this is akin to blasphemy. So, what's wrong with that sentiment? Sometimes what are you supposed to do? What can you do? What can you say? It seems to be something you would say at a Shiva, especially you don't know what to say next, right? No, what can you do? God's in charge has come to mind. It's actually true. What can we do? Rabbi Yosef is teaching that it is wrong to despair being able to do something. Judaism rejects this kind of thinking. There's always a way forward. Jews believe that even in death is not the ultimate end. In our daily prayers, we invoke Tchiyat HaMeitim, resurrection of the dead, is one of the Rambam's 13 fundamentals of Jewish faith. How do we understand such a complex principle? Keeping the memory and legacy of the Jewish past alive is Tchiyat HaMeitim. We are the resurrection. And the idea of resurrection is similar to what Rabbi Sacks was saying. We are Tchias HaMesim, and that is another way of looking at what we are believing in when we say Mechaya HaMesim. It's not only this an article of faith that has philosophical or spiritual connotations, but it's also something very practical, that we ensure that those who have died physically don't remain dead, and that the legacy lives on, but also we have faith that there will also ultimately be a form of resurrection. And which flavor, we saw a few of them, but I think that the fact that it is as complex as it is, and the fact that there are so many Jews who are less connected to this inspired way of Jewish living is why, alas, fewer Jews believe in an afterlife in America, more in Israel. Again, the idea of Jewish faith is complicated, and that's what makes it so great. But on some level, we can all rest assured in the adage that I'll be back. We'll be back. The Jewish people will continue.